It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the red fighting Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing today, Robert?
I am doing great, Andy. Really looking forward to fighting the Reds with the number one author of that, celebrating Ayn Rand's book, We the Living. But we're going to focus today on the film. And there are so many different heroes involved in the filmmaking, release, distribution, restoration. That's why we have a special guest with us today who has
That's
spent most of his adult life uh, working on this film, We the Living. Let's
Yeah, we
welcome
do have a
Duncan
special
Scott.
guest today. So, Robert, why don't you introduce him? Well,
Yeah, this is
there he is.
Duncan Scott, who I got to meet in 1986 at a private screening in New York City of We the Living, and then back in November we both spoke at Charlotte conference. And when I saw him talk about his restoration, I said we must have him on the Hero Show. So welcome, Duncan. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you. Good
us.
to see you, Robert. Andrew, happy to be
Yes,
here.
thank you, Duncan. Thanks for joining us here. It's a great topic. It'll be a great
My
show.
pleasure.
Thank you. So I can remember seeing We the Living. It seems to me it was late 1980s, maybe in New York City. It was 1990 when it debuted in New York. I remember sitting. One thing that really stuck out in my mind. Several things, Duncan. First of all, it was just a great movie. I mean, it was so well done, so faithful to Ayn Rand's novel. But I remember everybody smoking away, like chimneys, like they did back in the 1940s. I remember leaning over to my girlfriend and whispering in my ear, "They're all going to die of lung cancer before the commies can kill them." You know, So but but
It's true. I mean,
but
you see that
yeah,
in movies, American movies too. I mean, everybody's puffing away all the time.
right,
Mhm.
right, absolutely. So, what was your initial involvement in the film restoration project? How did this come about? I mean, and how did the film was like a bootleg, right? It was done without Ayn Rand's consent. So maybe you should start off by giving the viewers some of the history of this movie.
Sure, sure. And the first thing to know about how the movie got made is one of the big ironies, and there's a lot of ironies involved in this production. But the first and biggest irony is that We the Living was semi-autobiographical. You know, she drew heavily from her own life story growing up in Russia. And yet here is a movie was made without any input from her, without any permission from her, and without even her knowledge. I mean, they shot the whole film and she had no idea they were making the film.
Mhm.
Didn't find out about it until long after it was released. So it's really amazing that something like that could happen. And one of the explanations is that we were at war with Italy. They should have just not done this book because they had no mechanism for getting the rights. We were wartime enemies, but instead of doing that, they said, we'll go ahead and make the movie anyway, and we'll sort things out later. That was kind of the way the associate producer put it to me when I met him many years later. We'll just figure it out later. But they
That's the
went into
Italian
production.
way.
Yeah.
Robert says
Go
he's
ahead,
half
Duncan.
Italian, right? Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Duncan. Yeah.
Well, so the interestingly, and I would say first of maybe a minor hero in this story was the daughter of the head of Scalera Studios. Um, she read the book. It was a fairly popular book in Italy when it came out, roughly around 1939. Was quite popular in Italy, and she thought it would make a great movie. She talked to the people, her father, and the people at the studio. There was some concern about it because the anti-authoritarian themes in it obviously wouldn't reflect well on the fascist government. I say obviously, but I guess it wasn't obvious, as you'll find out later, uh, that these were trouble. You know, that they thought this was kind of a hot potato. It could get people into trouble if they made this movie. But they thought if they made it carefully and avoided, the most controversial issues, it all would be good. So
Duncan, let me ask you one question before you go on.
sure.
Did they read the novel in English or was it Italian translation?
Published in Italian. It was
Okay,
popular as an Italian book. Uh,
okay,
the uh, the publishing house, they must have, this was pre-war, so the publishing house made, proper legitimate licensing to do an
right.
Italian version of it. It was published in Italy and it was very popular.
Got it. Okay.
Mhm.
So
And
how'd
just
they get
one
around the
thing,
fascist? How'd they get around the fascist censors in making the film?
How do they get around the fact that what?
the
The
fascist
fascist
censors.
censors.
Well, that's an interesting story. Like I said, the producers were concerned about the political themes in the book, but they felt that if they handled it carefully, it would be everything would be okay. And the fascists control the Italian movie industry just like every other industry. So every movie that went into production had to be approved by fascist authorities. And and you might say, well, why did they even want to do this movie? Well, Russia was a wartime enemy of Italy,
Mm.
and anything that could make shed Russia in a bad light was thought to be that's a good idea. So on the surface, you look at We the Living, and the Russians are the villains, and the communists are the villains, and uh, it all looks like, hey, this is a good movie to make. It'll make our wartime enemy look bad. But they didn't. Unfortunately for them, they didn't look much deeper than that. But what they did do is during production, there was a lot of oversight on this movie. There were fascist authorities coming to the set, watching it be filmed, coming to the editing room each day when the dailies were delivered from the previous day's shooting, looking at what was there. One of the funnier stories that I heard is they would shoot a scene that they thought, well, you know what, this scene is actually kind of controversial. And then when the authorities came the next day to look at it, they tucked that scene away and showed them other footage. And the authorities knew they had a rough idea of how much of a movie gets shot every day. And they would say, "Wait a minute, is that all there is to? Didn't you shoot more yesterday?" And but anyway, there was a lot of kind of finagling and kind of getting around the censors, and they did that kind of hiding of footage and so forth all through the very long production, and actually put back these controversial scenes pretty much right before the film opened at the Venice Film
Mhm.
Festival in 1942, and then
Duncan,
all hell broke loose.
can
Yeah,
can we go into can we name some names here? So the director and the writer, I want to highlight
sure,
them
absolutely.
because they tell the story of the director, how we found this
Yeah.
writer.
Alessandrini, Alfredo Alessandrini was his name. Um, and in this picture, you're seeing him on the set directing Alita Valley and Rossano Brazzi in a scene.
And with a
Mhm.
He
cigarette,
was,
of course.
of course, with a
Yes.
cigarette. He was a pretty well established director. He uh, he had done some films that were sympathetic to fascism. I think a lot of people went along to survive in their careers. Um, and he was very excited about doing this movie. And they brought on a couple of writers who were big names in Italy to work to do the script while Alessandrini was away finishing up another movie. And then when he came back, he looked at the script and he just said, "This is hopeless." These writers had gotten very creative, and they changed really fundamental things in the script. Just an example, they changed Kira from desiring to be an engineer to wanting to be a ballerina, and you can just imagine,
Mhm.
all the changes all down the line that they made to the script. And he didn't even want these writers to rewrite it. He said, "I'm throwing this out. We're going to work with a new script." They were, though, ready to go into production. The sets were built, the actors were hired, the clock was ticking, and basically what they went ahead and did is a guy named Anton Mujano, who was the associate producer on the film. He wore a lot of hats. He was a uh, he worked closely with Alessandrini. That's a picture of him many years later. I met him in Rome, Italy, and he told a lot of this story. Now he is definitely one of the heroes of that we wouldn't have this film today if it wasn't for him. And one of the very first amazing things that he did is they had to go into production, and he took the book and he started writing the script, often just a day or two before they were filming it. And so he was drawing very heavily from what was in the book. There was no time to be creative, which was a very fortunate thing. They had to stick pretty closely to the book. And he'd be on the set. He'd be literally off in the corner of the set writing script and pages for the next day or the day after. And that's how the script got written. There was no full script in advance of the filming.
How tough is that
one
on
thing,
the actors, to kind of
well,
to
as
have
long
to
as they get their pages a day or two in advance, it's usually okay.
Mhm.
But writing a script that way, the movie, it's really hard to track how long the movie was becoming, and they kept filming and filming, and they were getting enough material for way more than one film. And in fact, the Italian version of We the Living was released initially as two films, but during production they didn't tell the actors that, hey, we've decided to make two films, not one. They just went ahead and
Mm.
filmed it, and they didn't want to tell the actors because they'd have to pay them more money. So, but Rossano Brazzi and Alita Valley caught on to that, and they sort of went on a mini strike and stopped working
Mm.
for a few days. And the studio came around and then negotiated more money, and then everything got back on track, and the film was finished. One other thing, though, you should know about the script is that the fascist authorities did insert some outright propaganda into some of the dialogue in a few places. It's a very, very small percentage of the whole script, but it was very clumsy dialogue that was inserted, very obvious to anybody. And when Ayn Rand, many years later, saw the film, said, I love the film and I love Alita Valley's performance and the other actors' performance, but these propaganda lines absolutely have to come out. And that was one of the things I did in my work as an editor working on the film
Mhm.
those many years later.
Yeah, the
So
film
it's
is so.
released.
Go
Yeah, go
ahead,
ahead,
Robert.
Andy. Yeah, I was
No, I was
just
just
gonna
good.
staying in Italy. It's released, and just like the book, audiences flock to see it because they realize,
Right.
yes, it's not only anti-communist, it's anti-totalitarianism. So they have the units for what is going on in their lives.
Yeah.
You want to
So
talk about that?
yeah, the movie opens and it premiered at the Venice Film Festival, won some prizes there, very acclaimed right
Hmm.
out of the gate. Got a lot of amazing reviews, except for a couple of reviewers who were catching on to the anti-authoritarian themes in the movie. But nevertheless, it went right into theaters, and it was an enormous hit in Italy. It was sort of their version of Gone with the Wind in the huge impact it had across the
Mm-hmm.
whole country. People
Mm-hmm.
flocked to the theaters. They had to go twice because it was two movies in that initial release, and no recap or anything. You saw the first 2 hours, and then another day you'd come back and see the final 2 hours of the film. And they loved it. It was galvanizing to the people of Italy, and people were caught up at it. And I mean, they so admired characters like Kira. They were literally naming their children Kira and
Mm-hmm.
Andre and Leo. Maybe not Andre. I haven't heard that part. But anyway, they got caught up in that tremendous way with the film, and the public caught on to the anti-authoritarian themes faster than the government did, and there was a lot of sly nudging and winking about what this movie was really saying, and the title of the first film in Italian was Noi Vivi, which translates to We the Living, but they would joke that it's We the Dead. And then the second movie was called Addio Kira, which is Goodbye Kira, but they would joke that it should be called Goodbye Lira, the money of Italy at that time, because inflation was so bad and poverty was so bad. And so it was really uh, a film that brought people together in their disgust and opposition to the government, and it was becoming very outright and very open. And this the government started to see this as something dangerous to them. The movie had been out for a few months. It was doing enormous business. Um, and Mussolini personally ordered that the film be banned, it be removed from the theaters, that all the prints and all the negatives be destroyed, that there be nothing left of We the Living. And that's We the Living would have been the number one. I have no doubt that it would have been the number one movie in Italy of that year had it not been banned. As it turned out, it was the number two movie of the year, but it was pulled
Mhm.
from the theaters right at the height of its very successful run. Now, so you might think, well, there it goes. The movie's ordered to be destroyed by no less than this dictator Mussolini. How did the movie survive? Well, then here enters another hero. Um, and if you can put his picture back up, Mujano, the balding gentleman with hand on his chin, he was the uh, associate producer, and as I said, wore many other hats. And along with a man named Massimo Ferrara, who was the head of Scalera Studios, they said, we have to save this film. And they enlisted a member of the crew, a high-level member of the crew, to take the negatives. They did send in the prints of the film to be destroyed, but they took the negatives and they hid them in the basement, essentially, of the home of this other person. And they had to send in a negative to be destroyed. So they picked another film that what they didn't value as highly as they did We the Living, and they sent it in, hoping that the fascists wouldn't notice, that the fascists would project the film. You don't usually do that with negatives anyway, and they somehow wouldn't notice. And this was a great personal risk to them. They were defying Mussolini's orders, and had they been caught, who knows? I mean, they might have been executed. I don't know, but fortunately, they weren't. And the negatives stayed in hidden away for the duration of the war. Um, and a lot of the people involved in the film, most of them really, this was the last film that was made during the war. They refused to do more films under the fascist authorities. Rossano
Mhm.
Brazzi, who plays Leo in the movie, um, he had already been doing some work with the Italian underground, and he completely left the movie industry and completely joined the underground. And another hero, at great personal risk, fought with the underground. And there were several close calls where he might have, he was in prison more than once and thought
Mhm.
that his time was going to be over. Fortunately, it was near the end of the war, and he was eventually released from prison as the war ended. Um, I've a person who's writing a biography of Rossano Brazzi, as we've been in touch and communicating a lot, and there's a lot coming out about his role working with the underground that has never been known before. It's just coming out this year. Uh,
Amazing.
Oddly enough,
Yeah.
a story that has not been told before.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
because he's such a famous actor, I didn't realize he was a member of the Italian resistance. Fighting against the fascists. That's a real hero. That's certainly a heroic story.
He really is, yeah.
Yeah.
And Alita
I know he
Valley,
came.
go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I was just going to mention briefly that they both had some degree of success in America, acting in American films. Never had the star power that they had in their homeland of Italy, but I actually wanted to go a little bit over to Andy for a minute and talking about the different characters. So, We the Living, there are three main characters, Kira. And whenever I hear someone's name their daughter Kira, I think, oh, they like Ayn Rand because in Italy, it happened over there. But even to this day, there's a pretty good chance that's the case. And I think Kira is the female of Cyrus, who was Ayn Rand's first hero she read about from the Mysterious Valley book series. But Andy, in one of his talks on We the Living, he mentions Leo. He has a higher opinion of Leo. By the way, spoiler alert for the book and the novel, clearly. But you can go over this over and over again. But Andy, I just want to give you the floor for a little bit, just to give you a take on Leo as a character in We the Living.
Sure. And you're right. The spoiler alert here for people who haven't read Ayn Rand's novel or seen the movie, so you might want to
Mhm.
do that first before we
Yeah.
discuss it. But I know a lot of readers of We the Living are negative about Leo because he's spiritually crushed and abandons Kira, and that and a lot of readers, including big Ayn Rand fans, think he's unworthy of Kira, and that Andre, who's an idealistic communist,
Mhm.
is morally stronger and more upright and more worthy of Kira. Now, I think there's a technical term for such a theory in philosophy. It's called bullshit. I mean that is just that is
Hey,
just
Elliot, can you put a picture of Leo up, by the way, the split screen one? Yeah, actually, the split screen one, we get a better image of him. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Andy.
yes,
I'm sorry
that
to
is.
interrupt.
No, that's a terrible misreading of the novel and of the characters. The key things about Leo. First of all, we need to know he's an aristocrat in the Soviet Union. Second of all, his father was Admiral Kovalensky, who was a Russian war hero. Now, it's been a long time since I read the book, so correct me if I'm wrong. Admiral Kovalensky had been executed by the communists for counter-revolutionary activities. Is that correct?
First,
That's
he's
right.
blinded. First, he's
Yeah.
blinded in a battle.
During the war. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a big hero. But the communists executed him as a counter-revolutionary, and then three, um, Leo is this kind of he's flippant, cocky, outspoken guy who's just contemptuous of the communists. And you add those three together, he's an aristocrat. He's the son of an executed counter-revolutionary, and he's an outspoken, contemptuous critic of communism. What that means is the full weight of the Soviet state comes down on him, specifically on his head, and not on anybody else. Leo is the prime enemy of the Soviet state. The full weight of its animosity of the totalitarian state comes down to the descendant to crush him. Andre, although he's an idealistic communist, he's not just a communist. He's a KGB officer or whatever, incarnation of their alphabet,
GPU. Hmm.
NKVD, yeah, GPU, whatever. He's a secret police officer of a totalitarian state. That means he's a bad guy. He's a really bad guy. And he has reasons to want to be a communist. He grew up under the Tsar and was brutally oppressed, and the communists promised equality for all and everything. Nevertheless, this is a totalitarian state. He's a secret police officer. No, it's very understandable why Kira loves Leo and not Andre. Leo is a far better man than Andre is. He's contemptuous of the communists. Whereas Andre's not only a
Hmm.
communist, he's a secret police officer. So, I'm with Kira on this. If,
Okay.
if I
I
was
think through
if
the
I was
novel,
her, I'd go Leo.
the evolution, I would just say the evolution of Andre is something that is appealing to me, how he goes almost 180 degrees. But okay, so coming back to the film, the war is over. The fascists are defeated. Thank you, USA. And now the next stage is Duncan. Let's tell us, bring some new heroes. Her lawyer, Henry Mark Holzer. But what was the next step? How did she find out about this? And the next stages
Sure.
of the discovery of the film.
Well, in the years immediately following the war and before the studio went out of business that had made We the Living,
Hmm.
uh, they sent um, Rosanna Brazzi, who played Leo, and Alida Valli, who
Hmm.
played Kira, to the U.S. to meet with Ayn Rand, to
Hmm.
persuade her to give them the literary rights after the fact so that they could go back and release the movie. Because without
Hmm.
those literary rights, the war was over. So they had no way to release the movie. They needed those rights. And Ayn Rand at the time didn't want to see this movie re-released, not because she didn't like the movie, but she had been approached by Hollywood studios to do a new English language version of We the Living at the time, and these things can drag out for years and years, and never did happen. But when the studio and when the actors met with Ayn Rand. She thought there may be a brand new Hollywood version of We the Living, so why I shouldn't be approving this, this unauthorized
Hmm.
Italian version.
Hmm.
So, but she did see the film finally. This is probably a good 4 years after it was made, um, and overall she loved it, and she loved Alida Valli's performance. Everybody just it's a remarkable performance, and I just want to interject that her performance is infused with so much power, and there were things going on in her life that she probably tapped into, not very powerful things. She had
Hmm.
been had a romantic relationship with a pilot who was in the war, and just in the weeks leading up to filming, his plane was shot down and he was killed, and that kind of powerful event was clearly, to me anyway, that she was drawing from that kind of intense emotion in her performance. If you look at other movies that Alida Valli did, she's very good in pretty much every one of them, but nothing like you see in We the Living. Um,
Hmm.
if people, one of her English language films that people might want to make a note to take a look at is The Third Man. It's a classic film
Oh yeah,
with
right.
Orson
Hmm.
Welles and Joseph Cotton.
Yes.
It's a must-see film for any film lover, and Alida Valli is the female lead in that movie. But anyway,
Hmm.
getting back to what happened to the movie after the war, she declined to have the film re-released. So they had to kind of put the film away. And then the studio that made the film went out of business. And the negatives of We the Living and a lot of other films got sold to another party and then sold again to another party. And pretty much over the next few years, the film was basically lost. You couldn't easily tell where it was. It was just that much change and tumult going on.
Hmm.
So the years went by, and We the Living became an enduring classic. The book in America, the novel
Yes.
stayed in print. It was to this day still in print. Very popular book, even though it's not Ayn Rand's most famous book. It's an enduring classic. And by the late '60s, it already established itself that way. And at that point,
Hmm.
the next heroes that I'm going to mention who saved this movie from oblivion is Henry Mark Holzer and Erica Holzer. They were a married couple who were associates of Ayn Rand, and they handled legal matters for him, for her rather. And
Hmm.
during the course of handling these matters, she casually, actually, as I understand it, mentioned, "Oh, there was a movie version made of We the Living many years ago." And they were
Hmm.
shocked, as anybody was at that time, because nobody knew that a movie had been made of We the Living, and that was amazing news. Um,
Yeah.
and they asked her what happened to it, and by that time it was a good maybe 20 years after she had been approached to give up the literary rights, and she said she
Hmm.
hasn't heard anything about it for years, and as far as she knows, it's a long lost project, a long lost film. And they took it
Can we
upon
get a
themselves.
picture? I'm sorry, Duncan. Ellie, can we show
Yeah,
the picture of the two holders, please? Thank you
yeah.
for
That's
that.
the Holzers, roughly in the early '80s,
Mhm.
and they made it their mission to go
Mhm.
and see if they could find this movie. And Ayn Rand said, I don't even know if this film still exists. There's no way to know. And they said, let us try. And if we can find the film, would you be willing to let us bring it back to America? Uh, you have your input, and everyone knew in advance that there were propaganda lines in the movie that had to come out. Very small percentage of
Mhm.
the overall film. I probably less than 2%. But they
Mhm.
but they had to come out. And they said absolutely, they would do that. And if you can, and she said, if you can find the film, I'll agree to give you the rights, the literary rights, so that it now can be legally released. So with that,
Mhm.
they started researching and looking for the film. Now, mind you, at this point, it was in the late 1960s, so there's no internet.
Mhm.
There's no easy way to do this kind of research. Even making phone calls to Italy was a big deal. They ended up searching for the film for the better part of 2 years. They made multiple trips to Italy, um, and it was detective work. And they eventually tracked down that the negatives were in storage in an obscure storage facility, and they were
Wow.
still preserved and still in great shape. And the Holzers told the people that had it, in essence, will buy it on the spot. I mean, they did look at some of the film. There was no way to project the whole film right there, but they saw enough of it to know this is it. We have to buy this film. So they bought it
Mhm.
immediately. I would say the people who owned it and had it in storage really didn't understand how valuable this was in America, that the book and Ayn Rand had become such, you know, powerful, well-known, influential
Mhm.
figures in America. But anyway, the Holzers bought the film and they brought it back to the U.S. And shortly after that is when I became involved. Um, I
Yeah. So
read a
let me just real quick, Duncan. So let's just go back, setting the context of We the Living. It's published in America late 1930s, I think 36 or 37, which is the Red Decade, which it was not popular as most of her novels were underground at first. And the critics were, their answer was that
dismissive.
the author doesn't understand socialism, right? So it's
The author
leftist
who grew
critics
up under it
not
didn't
saying
understand it.
exactly, yeah. And so
And
now,
who's has an IQ about 8 times higher or 10 times higher than her critics did. Yeah, that
exactly,
didn't
yeah,
understand,
yeah.
what
So,
she had lived through.
okay, so now it's you enter the stage. Give us the backstory of how you found out about it, and you're in your
Sure.
early
So,
20s, teens. What? Yeah, give us the.
so I had discovered Ayn Rand in a way different than most other people who have her books recommended to them. I just happened upon her on television on Johnny Carson late one night. She ended up appearing on the
1967.
Johnny Carson Tonight Show three
Yeah.
times, and I
Yes.
just accidentally caught it the first time she appeared, and
Hmm.
my jaw dropped to the floor because she was
Mm.
saying all these things that I believed in the back of my mind, but you know, in a vague sort of way, which she, of course, had all put together in the brilliant way that she did those things,
Hmm.
and she was able to express it so beautifully to a layman audience uh, that she was talking to
Mm.
on the Tonight Show. And just
Hmm.
parenthetically, it's amazing that someone like Ayn Rand would be allowed to talk for 20, 30 minutes on a
Yeah.
late night talk show. And nowadays, it would be 30 seconds or a minute, and they wouldn't
Yes.
be allowed to talk about anything serious. But anyway,
Yeah, and
this was
Johnny
another
Carson
thing.
even then,
canceled. He
yeah,
canceled
even
all
then,
his other guests. Yeah.
even then, cancel culture would go after the host for
Oh yeah,
how you
oh
had
yeah.
Ayn Rand on
Yeah.
your show. You have to cancel you from your ABC contract or your NBC contract, or whatever.
So anyway, that's how I discovered her.
Yeah.
I just
Hmm.
said, I have to find out more about this woman. I was, I believe, 21 years old at that time, and I ran
Hmm.
out the next day. I ran to a bookstore. I was late for work, and I didn't care. I had to go and pick up a book. Um, and my very first Ayn Rand book was Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal. I later
Mm.
read all the novels, of course, and the other nonfiction books, but I was completely hooked at that point. And I, at that time, they had some lectures and presentations in New York, and
Hmm.
there was now defunct organization, the Nathaniel Branden Institute, that gave these talks, and
Hmm.
Ayn Rand would appear. And I went to one or two of those and saw her in person, and just incredibly impressed with everything. And they had a
Mm.
small publication called The Objectivist, and it was I believe, monthly
Yes.
magazine um,
Hmm.
with various articles, most of them written by her or people very closely associated with her. And in the back of the magazine, there were sometimes a little sort of classified type listing of events coming up and information for people to know. And in one issue, it said the old long lost movie version of We the Living has been rediscovered. It's been brought back to America, and it's now going to be edited and prepared for its first release in America. And I did something very out of character for me at that age. By that time, I was maybe 22, and to go after a project like that, it was pretty early in my career. I had had not established any name for what I did, but I decided I'm going to write them a letter and volunteer to work on this project, offer myself to work on this project,
Mhm.
and I sat down and wrote it off. And then right after I sent it out, what am I doing? I don't know them. They don't know me. I have no standing. It's very early in the career. I'm 22 years old.
You're too young
No,
to know what you're not able to do, right? Yeah, that's
exactly.
perfect.
Uh,
Right.
and weeks went by, and I thought, yeah, sure enough, they're going to ignore it. Now, this letter was to Henry Mark and Erica Holzer, the people that had found the movie in
Mhm.
Italy. And sure enough, I eventually did get an answer. I eventually did go and meet them, and it turned out there had been someone who was going to work on the project, and that there was a change, and they liked the idea of me working on the project. So in
Mm.
very short order, I was brought on, and one of the very first things we had to do was to run the film for Ayn Rand and her close circle, at that time the jokingly
Mhm.
called the Collective, and we
Mhm.
set up
Mhm.
a screening in the studio, the film company that I was an employee at the time. We, with their permission, I had used a big room that they had, and we ran the film on a machine called a moviola, which is uh,
Yes. Mhm.
like this big and that tall, and it has a tiny little screen, maybe a 5-inch diagonal screen, and you thread the
Mm.
film in the machine, and it gets projected on this tiny little screen. And you have to
Mm.
picture Ayn Rand and the Collective all huddled around this little moviola, watching the movie one reel at a time. And mind you, it hadn't been edited in any way. It was running 4 hours at the time,
Wow.
plus the time it take to change the reels every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So it
Mhm.
was really quite something to see. And it wasn't subtitled. So someone stood to the side and had a script with English on one side and Italian on the other side, and read the English as the film went by on the moviola. And
Wow.
that was the first time Ayn Rand saw the film since the late 1940s, when the studio had arranged a screening
Mhm.
for her way back then. And it was the first time
Mhm.
any others in the Collective, so-called, had seen the film.
Mhm.
So it was quite an event, and it was quite something to see. I wish
Yeah.
uh, it was like today, where everybody had a camera on their phone and pictures were taken,
Yeah.
but they weren't.
So
It was
you
some.
actually you mentioned Rand preferred We the Living to the Fountainhead film, which she actually wrote the screenplay for. So do I. I like We the Living way more than any other adaptation
Me
of
too.
her
Me
novels,
too.
right? But Duncan,
Just a
tell
second, just a second, Robert. Let
yeah,
me just interject here
yeah,
because The Fountainhead's my all-time favorite book. Fiction,
me too.
nonfiction. Since I was 16, it's my all-time favorite book. And I like Gary Cooper a lot, generally as an actor, but I don't think he was a good choice to play Howard Roark. It would have been great if I know Clark
100%
Gable
agree.
wanted that role. Yeah, I mean Clark Gable would have been much more emotional power into that role.
Yeah.
But so I don't not a big fan of the Fountainhead film. Love the movie. I love the book, obviously. But yeah, I agree. The We the Living. I think the film is a lot better than the Fountainhead.
I think
Mhm.
a lot of people don't understand why Ayn Rand was not happy in the end with The Fountainhead, because she had written the script, and she even got from the studio something that's unheard of back then, and unheard of really today, which is she got an agreement, a binding agreement, that they would not change a word of her script, and they did, and they stood by that. But one thing she didn't realize was going to happen is that after they filmed it, and filmed it word for word, then they edited the hell out of it, and they changed
Mm.
things around in the editing without changing a word of her script. They made the film very different. And so even though they had abided by that agreement, the end result was something she was unhappy with. And I think a lot of fans of Ayn Rand are unhappy with that film, probably for the same reasons. And I agree
And
with
also,
you, Andrew.
yeah,
Gary Cooper, I don't think he understood the part. You can almost
right.
sense that he looked confused about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely.
So the
And I'm a
collective,
Wait. Let me say something here, Robert.
yeah,
A second. And I'm a Gary Cooper fan generally. You know, his two
me
Oscars
too.
for for High Noon and for Sergeant York. I thought, well, well deserved. He's good. When he doesn't have to
Lou
talk much, he
Gehrig,
doesn't
he's
have to
perfect
play an
as.
yeah, yeah. When he doesn't have to play an intellectual and give a philosophic speech at the end, when he can act with his face, with his facial muscles and
Mhm.
in a man and be a man of few words, he's very good. But if he's got to give a philosophic speech, it's beyond his range. I think it's
Yeah.
not the right role for Gary Cooper. I do think I
I
heard that Clark Gable
totally agree.
wanted the role, and I think he would have been much better as
Mhm.
Howard Roark. Nevertheless, that movie, from what I've understand, even though I'm not a big fan of it, has brought people to the book. I've heard from people who first saw the Fountainhead movie on a Late
Yes.
Show or something, or on TV or whatever, and then went and got the book. So it's still good publicity for the novel.
Yeah, Ayn Rand herself said any adaptation of my work only serve as an advertisement for going to the actual novel. So in that
Right.
sense, it's good. So Duncan, are the collective, they see the movie, their reaction, your next step. Fill us in on that.
Right. So everybody was very impressed with the film, even seeing it under those circumstances.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of remarks about how pretty Rosanna Brazzi was in the role of Leo, and of course,
Yeah.
goes without saying, Alida Valli was pretty. Um, Fosco Giacchetti, who played Andre, it was older than Andre is depicted in the book, and older than what she had in mind. However, she thought
Thank
he
you.
did an amazing job. And
Mhm.
as someone who sits and goes through this movie over and over for the restoration process and other reasons, over the years, I've come to appreciate incredibly uh, what Fosco Giacchetti does with this role. His character has the biggest arc of change from the beginning
Yes.
of the film to the end. He's a
Mhm.
rigid ideologue communist, and doesn't question it at all at the beginning of the movie. And you see this transformation over the course of the movie, and the pain that it causes him as the realization gradually sinks in, and your heart breaks for him by the end of the movie. And that's an
This
incredible arc.
climactic scene that we have right here, the image of
Yeah,
him
this is
holding.
this moment that you're looking at. He has been in love with Kira. He's expressed love for Kira, but she won't. He wanted her to run off with him, which was something that would have been unheard of for Andre to suggest
Hmm.
at the beginning of the movie. Um, but he had no idea that she was actually living with Leo, and that
Hmm.
she was madly in love with Leo. That she had been, well, big spoiler alert here, had been sleeping with Andre. Kira was sleeping with Andre in order to get enough money to pay for Leo to go away and convalesce. He got tuberculosis
Hmm.
and had to recover, and the money, but there was no money to do that kind of thing, and the state government
Hmm.
wouldn't let someone like Leo be sent to a state home.
Hmm.
And so Kira took it upon herself to get the money by pretending to love Andre, who you see there holding her dress, because he's come to Leo's house to arrest him. And only at this very moment does he realize that she has been Leo's lover. And it's an incredibly climactic moment. And it leads to,
Hmm.
a minute later, this immensely powerful confrontation between Kira
Hmm.
and Andre over what happened and what the state, the Soviet state, had done to Leo and done to them, and how they had to live their
Hmm.
lives because of this philosophy that Andre was fully signed on for in the beginning. And
And was
this
enforcing as a secret police officer.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
let me interrupt for just a minute, Duncan. Let's
Yeah.
put in a plug. Let's put in a plug here for Ayn Rand, the novelist. What a story! What a story
Yes.
this is. I mean,
Conflict,
it's
conflict,
yeah,
conflict.
yeah, absolutely. It's overshadowed by the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Understandably, I think those are the two greatest novels ever written. But
Hmm.
what a plot structure this is, and the way Ayn Rand weaves this love triangle into her conflict and into her theme, of
That's
individualism
true.
versus
And
collectivism, individualism versus
it's
totalitarianism.
very
This is a hell of a
heartfelt.
novel. This is a great
Absolutely.
novel.
Yes.
It
Just on
is.
its own terms. You know,
And I
Yep.
think
leaving
for
aside
people who
Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, this is a great novel. It should be appreciated literarily, even by people who may be more sympathetic to communism than any of us are. This is a great
Hmm.
novel. This is beautifully written. So powerful. The integration of the love triangle into her political theme and
Hmm.
everything, and into her plot structure, it's just brilliantly done.
and I
Brilliantly
think for people who've never read other Ayn Rand works, it's a great entry to her universe and all the ideas that you discover in her other novels. Um, it's a We the Living is very heartfelt, and drawn, and no doubt because she's drawing so much from personal experience, and which is something that she chose not to do. She wanted to create her own world, so her other books are worlds that she created. But in We the Living, she drew a lot from her own years growing up in Russia, and
Hmm.
it's it's uh, it's an amazing experience, as you're saying, Andrew. And people who say, I don't know about Ayn Rand, I'm thinking about reading her. You can't do better really than picking up We the Living, and then you'll want to go on to her other novels and her nonfiction
Hmm.
writing, I think.
Let me just jump in, Duncan, and quote Rand in her introduction. This is October 1958, comparing it as a semi autobiography. She says, she ends this long, wonderful introduction by saying, "The specific events of Kira's life were not mine. Her ideas, her convictions, her values were and are." So that's something about the similarities there. But coming back to Leo, and share with us a couple of scenes later, you had an impact on the movie. How, I'm sorry, Andre, his suicide is also a pivotal scene. Not too many scenes after that, and you had some input that ended up um, in the updated version of this of the film. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So after that screening that I described, the
Hmm.
next stage was for me and Ayn Rand to sit together and discuss what needed to be done with the
Wow.
film. Hank and Erica Holzer were lawyers and not film editing and so forth was not their area. So we had several sessions with that. It was just Ayn Rand and myself sitting shoulder to shoulder, going through the
Hmm.
film scene by scene, and we had a script that we again had the English translation. Again, we had no way to actually read subtitles, but we went through the film that way, and she looked at what was there, and she felt that the core story of the three characters of Kira, Leo, and Andre was beautifully done, um, and needed to be focused on and preserved. There were some subplots, other characters that were maybe less successfully done, and she felt that some of those could go. Um, the It was quite an extensive work session to discuss everything that needed to be done, and there were problems that had to be solved. For instance, in her novel, Andre kills himself when he realized the crushing reality of this ideal that he had, how corrupt it was. Um, but in the movie version, instead of Andre killing himself, the secret police send over a squad and shoot him in his apartment. And she said that has to change. He has to have committed suicide. It's important to me,
Yeah,
she
yeah,
said, to
absolutely.
understand that character.
Hmm.
And so we
Right.
found
Yeah.
a way, just with editing, because we couldn't go out and shoot new scenes, but we found a way with editing to make it look like he commits suicide. There's a shot of him picking up a gun. He's contemplating it. So we were very fortunate. At least they filmed a moment where he's contemplating suicide. and then we cut out the secret police coming. We show him tossing a nightgown that he had given to Kira, but she rejected it. He's throwing it into the flames. That's the end of his any hope of Kira or anything like that, or a life abroad. And we've seen him contemplating the gun, and then we hear a gunshot go off, and we realize that he's killed himself. So she was quite happy that there was a solution
Right.
that would have Andre killing himself. And there were many
And
other.
that's how it was done in the Fountainhead film too, with Gail Wynand, right? As I recall,
Yes.
you hear the
Yes.
gunshot. Raymond Massey, you see with a gun, and
Yeah.
you hear the gunshot,
Yeah, I think that
and you
was
know that.
often the case
that
in movies of that period. You wouldn't graphically see somebody shoot themselves.
Right.
So to see a
yeah,
gunshot, and
there was
yeah,
no
that would
Quentin
be
Tarantino back then making
thankfully,
No.
yeah.
films of that kind.
Yes.
So it was an amazing experience to work with her. I was very
Hmm.
young. I hope my knees weren't knocking together during these sessions.
Mm.
But she was what impressed me was she really understood the film editing process. I thought I'd have to explain how film editing works. And I mean, nowadays everybody has film editing software on their computer, but we're talking about a period where most people had no idea what film editors did. But she was very savvy about it. I mean, she had worked in Hollywood. She
Sure.
had great ideas about how to cut down the film. We did end up releasing it as basically a 3-hour film so that it could be seen in one continuous story. And that worked out really well. Um, of course, a lot of time was spent on translating it and making it true to the book. And Erica Holzer, in particular, spent enormous hours looking at the literal translation of the Italian movie, but comparing it with dialogue in the book, and making sure everything was true to the book. Even if it meant maybe the literal translation wasn't exactly what they said, it was more important that it be true to the book. And we did that
Hmm.
again. I did that again, actually, for this newest restoration. And I want to make sure to mention this. I
Hmm.
don't know how much time we have left, but
Yeah, we'll
um,
get to the new. Just one question before we get
sure,
to. So 1986, it's actually released. That's when I first met you. But
80,
she
88,
died in
actually, yeah.
80. Oh, 88. I'm sorry, but she died in 82. So what was her last? Before we come to the present, Duncan, I just want to. What was her last interaction with the movie? Like, at what stage was it before it actually coming to be released in 88?
Well, we were in a holding pattern, frankly, for a long time. The
Hmm.
editing that she had asked me to do was completed.
Hmm.
Um, the we all nobody wanted to proceed without her active involvement, and she said she wanted to stay involved, but she had so many other things that were drawing her attention, and
Right.
work that she was doing and writing that she was doing, and she was getting older. And the year and what we thought might be months turned into years while we stayed in this holding pattern. And the Holzers and
Hmm.
myself agreed, boy, this movie was made without her involvement to begin with. We're not going to continue with it without her involvement when she said
Hmm.
that she would like to get back to it. But it never came about before she died. The
Hmm.
we So it kind of stayed in that holding pattern, and then she passed away, and
Sure.
Henry Mark Holzer had a conversation with Leonard Peikoff of the estate, and it was agreed that we should finish up this film and get it out. It was
Hmm.
almost ready to go anyway at that point. There was still
Hmm.
quite a bit of work to do with the subtitles. That was one of the main uh, final
Right.
things that we had to work
Right.
on.
So then it's released. I get it on VHS when that comes out. I get it on DVD when that comes out. And now we're
You
on
didn't
the
get it on the
80th
laser
anniversary.
disc? It was on
No.
laser disc. Does anyone remember
Okay,
that
I'm not.
format?
No, no, actually.
My in-laws had them. I never did. But
Well,
so now is we're coming up on the 80th anniversary, bringing us to the present. I see you last November in Charlotte. You show some film clips with side by side, and now Ellie, we can go to that. Splitting the screen here. So to the left is the version that was the 1942 film, or the re-released film. And what Duncan has gone through, and he'll explain to the right, he's going through every single frame, cleaning it up of the images, and tell us
Yeah.
about that, Duncan.
Yeah. So the film, the 35 millimeter film that was released in 1988, film is very high resolution. So if you're familiar with video and your high definition and so forth, um,
Mm-hmm.
film, even if it's a film from 80 years ago, is very high definition. And so in the theaters, viewers saw a high definition version of We the Living. However,
Mm-hmm.
it had scratches and dirt and other things that were printed into the film. I mean, it was the negative had been mishandled and prints were made. When I say mishandled, this was back during the years of the war and when the movie was hidden away. So there were lots of scratches and dirt and other defects. Um, and when we made the first versions for home video, all those defects were still in there. That version was made in the early 90s, and we just didn't have all the wonderful digital tools that we have now, where software can go in and recognize what's a spot of dirt and what's a scratch, and
Mm-hmm.
remove it without any. It's like magic, really.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't have that in the 90s. So the VHS and the DVD, they all came out. They were not in high definition. That was even in the early 90s, high definition really hadn't come on. So we have the
Mm-hmm.
standard definition video with dirt and scratches, and that's what everyone has had available to them from the mid 90s right up to the present day. So I saw the 80th anniversary of the film approaching. I had recently made a high definition scan of the film, so the resolution was way up there now. But then there was the
Mm-hmm.
issue of all this dirt and scratches. So I decided, you know what, for the 80th anniversary, we're going to do an 80th anniversary edition. We're going to go through everything. We'll have this software and the other things that we needed to do to fix these defects. In addition to dirt and scratches, there were places where the film jiggles because film has sprocket holes in it, and old film
Mm-hmm.
can start to jiggle. There were frames that were missing, and on and on. It was an enormous job, much bigger than I originally thought. But I'm really thrilled, that we did it and it's done. And now
Mm-hmm.
we've got the 80th anniversary edition, high resolution, high definition rather, beautifully repaired and rejuvenated. And I think it looks a lot like it did when it first opened at the Venice Film
Mm-hmm.
Festival in Italy. And one of the things that we're in talks about right now is to have the Venice Film Festival bring it back this September, which would be exactly the 80th anniversary of when it
Wow.
opened, and show it again,
Oh,
a
that, wow,
re-premiere.
wow,
Yeah. I can't say at this
that'd be
moment
great.
that's I can't say it's definite yet, but we're working on that. But at any rate, the 80th anniversary edition is coming out this year. It's going to be beautiful. It'll be
Yeah.
something that can be streamed off platforms. I can't
Mm-hmm.
say definitely which ones yet, but platforms like Amazon Prime or many, there's many other, and possibly multiple platforms at the same time. So it'll be
Mm-hmm.
downloadable and streamable. And we'll consider also DVD versions. DVD is a technology that's, going on its way out, and so
Yes.
there's some, we'll see if it makes sense to have a version like that. But it'll be readily available on these video on demand platforms, and we're really excited about that.
Well, that's great, Duncan. I love, lying in bed at night watching these classic old Hollywood movies on Amazon Prime for $4, whatever. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
chance to see this chance to see a restored We the Living, at home, comfortable for a few dollars on Amazon Prime or some other streaming platform, that'd be great. So thank you,
And looking
thank you for
and
doing
looking
that,
better
Duncan.
than you've ever seen it, believe me. I mean,
Yeah.
look
Well,
closely at the image on the
yeah,
right there, the texture on Leo's face that you can see,
yeah.
shadowing and
Mm-hmm.
so forth that you just can't see on the left. That sets
The
up
Yeah.
how,
clarity, the
yeah,
clarity is much, much greater in the restored version. That's for sure. Well,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for doing that, Duncan. That is a heroic task in and of itself.
That's it's the last stage of the heroic arc from Ayn Rand to the Italian filmmakers to the Holzers finding it, and Duncan getting involved, and
I just
now
want to mention
redoing it.
to
Yes.
your viewers that if they want to find out more about the film, and we have a very extensive website called wethelivingmovie.com. Remember to put in
Yep.
the word movie, wethelivingmovie.com, and there's just enormous amount of background material, photographs, you name it.
Yeah.
Everything you would want to know about the film is there, and I think your viewers might enjoy that, and including news about the restoration. And we'll update it
Hmm.
when we know exactly what platforms it'll be on, at what film festivals it'll be, where it'll be
Hmm.
presented. So that's all available on that website.
And you're still looking for contributors, which Carrie Ann and I promised to
Yes,
write you a check.
yes. One of the
So these things don't
we're at
grow
the
on
tail.
trees, you know.
Yeah, one of the
You.
things that's really important, and I hope people recognize this, is
Hmm.
you can restore a film or you can make a film, and it can be a great film, but people might not see it if you don't put a lot of time and effort and money into
Hmm.
publicity and promotion and advertising.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how good the project is if there isn't a adequate budget for those things. So we're still
Yeah.
trying to. We want people to reach out to us. We have on the website. You can see information on how to help on that. I
Hmm.
financed the restoration out of my own pocket, and I'm thrilled that I did. But this publicity and advertising area is very expensive, and I'm hoping
Hmm.
people who are fans of Ayn Rand and the film will join with
Yeah.
us and help us bring it
Hmm.
known to the world. I mean, when you're on a streaming platform, anyone anywhere in the world can watch it. So we just need to get the
Yeah.
word out,
Right.
and that's the next big thing.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Well,
if anything, Andy, just a couple things,
yeah.
and I'll
Go
hand
ahead.
it off to you.
Go ahead, Robert.
If any, everyone in the world should see this movie from wherever they are, because
Yeah.
it is an incredible achievement. And what you're doing,
Hmm.
Duncan, we have in the show note links to We the Living Movie. We have this short documentary you had recorded about 10 years ago, which shows the evolution of from Italy to America, and then a short, like, 1 minute video that you have that shows the split screen of the before and current restoration work that you're doing. So all of that's included in the show notes for people to look at. And uh, you know, thank you to all the heroes who've been playing different roles in this movie's uh, between it being finished and now the restoration involved. So
And
go ahead,
thank
Andy.
you to both of you. You're the latest heroes in this saga, getting the word out here. And so many people need to hear about this film. Even big fans of
Yes.
Ayn Rand often aren't aware that this film exists, and it's so
Right.
important to
Mhm.
just let everybody know. And I'm so thankful to you, both of you, to let me come
Mhm.
on and talk about it. I love talking about the film, and really appreciate this.
Well, you're very welcome, Duncan, and thank you. And I will contribute. So I'll get your contact information from Robert, and
Mhm.
whether it's via Venmo or PayPal, or even if I have to send you a hard copy check, do it the old-fashioned way. I'll contribute to this
Sounds good
project.
to
But
me.
yeah, recommend to
Okay.
everybody, especially Ayn Rand fans, but to anybody who's literary, anybody who loves literature.
Yeah.
This is a great story. This
And
is a
film.
great novel, and yeah, as I said, this is a great novel, and it's a great movie, and I
Yeah.
recommend to anybody who loves literature and film. You're right, Robert, to
Mhm.
watch this movie on a streaming platform or wherever they can. So I think
Mhm.
want to salute Ayn Rand for the author of We the Living, and you, Duncan Scott, and everybody, all the other heroes involved in this project, salute you and say thank you, and wish everybody involved here to have a heroic day. And everybody out there in Hero Land, let's all strive to lead more heroic lives. And we'll be back next week on the Hero Show. So have a heroic day, everybody.
Thank you. You too, and
You too. Bye bye.
Thank you.
bye.